Hello and welcome back to KASA RPL. This is the second episode. We are trying to go orbital in this one. So basic principle for launches on this rescaled Earth-like planet. I guess we could go ahead and call it Earth. It's not too out of the question to say that this is a rough simulation of our solar system. But when building a rocket to get into orbit around the Earth, you want about 9,500 meters per second in delta V to be able to get through the atmosphere, get up to the correct height, and then go, I think it's 7.5 kilometers a second sideways. There we're seeing some shock effects, and we're actually getting a little bit of shock heating. Not too much. That's usually caused by our thrust to weight ratio being too high. I'm actually concerned about the temperature a little bit here. And there we ditched the lower stage. And you can see we were quite off of our velocity vector on this. It is really difficult for me to control that gravity turn. I still haven't got the hang of it yet. And there goes the fairing. And we are actually launching Vanguard with this, which is a very small ball. And I'm going to go ahead and activate the data recorder now. Science is done a little bit differently in the Realism Overhaul. I think it's Realism Overhaul that adds that. It's one of the mods. The way you do it now is you get to a certain biome. In this case, we are in space low, and activate the data recorder, gain a certain amount of data required to run an experiment, and then we can actually run the experiment. Unfortunately, when we reset, we don't get the data back. I guess I could talk a little bit about Sputnik. So it's a little bit over 10 years after World War II ended. The United States and Russia are in a Cold War, mainly over resources, but backed by differing ideologies. The year is 1957. Soviet Russia sticks a radio frequency transmitter on an ICBM and launches it into orbit. This was a further demonstration of Russia's ability to destroy US cities safely from the homeland. Eisenhower, the US president at the time, came from a military background and was very reluctant to respond in any military way. 7 months after Sputnik, Eisenhower commissioned a civilian organization to launch Vanguard, a much smaller radio transmitter. Unfortunately, civilian rocketry hadn't advanced sufficiently, and Vanguard blew up on the pad. Explorer was commissioned 6 months later. It would launch on top of a modified V2 rocket. The project was overseen by Wernher von Braun, and it did unfortunately spark another Russian arms race. 6 months after Explorer was launched, NASA was founded on July 28, 1958. Okay, so this will be the second launch of the episode. This rocket is designed a little bit differently. Its main off-the-ground thrust comes from 2 solid rocket boosters, which have parachutes and are recoverable. And then after they fire, the main liquid-fueled rocket ignites and gets us up to about 4 kilometers a second sideways at the correct height. And then the upper stage takes it from there. And as you can see, I've already started my gravity turn because our thrust to weight ratio is pretty good on this one. And the engine is on and at full throttle. Actually, I have real fuels installed, so full throttle doesn't matter. The engines currently in the beginning of the career are fully on or fully off. There's no in between. The last one didn't quite make it into orbit, and that was mostly because of a piloting error. I didn't steer it correctly. It had to be very precise. This one probably will, because it does have extra delta V. If you've noticed, the rocket exhaust looks a little bit better or different. That is because I have hot rockets installed. Oh, that is the Explorer probe that I'm using there. Is that the Bahamas? That might actually be Cuba. I think it's the Bahamas. Bahamas. I also have distant objects installed. That's why the sky is kind of black, and you can see some dots orbiting the sun there. I should have engine igniter installed, so these engines only get one ignite. But early on, when I was learning it, it added a level of difficulty that I wasn't really comfortable with. So I've kept it uninstalled. Maybe I will eventually install it. Okay, we have good stage separation. I've already gathered a little bit of science, and we are now successfully in orbit. So I will go to the next launch, which would be this thing. We are going to be launching a mapping probe. The weather isn't quite right, so we're going to accelerate a little bit. Now this is quite different. It's very cylindrical, unlike the other ones. We're going for drag coefficiency, the most efficient drag coefficiency on this one. We do have a little bit of problems, as you will see later on, in the upper stage not being stable. That is a problem with these type of rockets. This is a time-crucial launch. It has to be either done at dawn or dusk, so the solar panels can stay in the sunlight throughout the entire orbit. We did have to skip ahead in time a little bit to get past those clouds. Although they don't actually generate physics, they do in real life. So I'm going to act like they do. And then here's what I was talking about. It starts to rotate. And I'm not sure why. I put some fins on the bottom of it, but it doesn't seem to stabilize it. I don't think there's enough air pressure for them to get grip. I think it's probably that engine that's pulling it down. Or it could be just the time warp bug. But in any case, I just wait for the correct time and turn the engine on. So I was rewatching the Storytelling of Science just recently. It was a presentation given last year. Well, I guess it was more of a talk. Conference would probably be a better word to describe it. It was Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Greene. Brian Greene? I think it's Brian Greene. Bill Nye and Richard Dawkins and a few other people that I'm not too familiar with. And one of the things that came up was Neil deGrasse Tyson had mentioned or someone had mentioned the reason for the Apollo program being canceled 3 missions early was because of lack of public interest. And Neil deGrasse Tyson was really adamant about that not being the case. And instead, it was because we were no longer at war with Russia. And so there was no real reason to continue funding the Apollo program. Although there was still plenty of science to be done. And I kind of have to agree with that, because that seems to be the motivation for the beginning of NASA, from what I've read and seen with Eisenhower. That was the original motivation for putting Explorer in orbit. Well, first trying with Vanguard, and then that being a failure. I guess in that respect, this is kind of realistic, because Vanguard did fail to go into orbit, though in real life it failed on the pad. Okay, so we got this satellite all set up and in a polar orbit, and that shall be mapping the Earth over the next few days. I think it'll take about 15 days to fully map the planet, and we'll get some science from that. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, please click the like button below and subscribe if you want some more, and I shall talk to you next time. Goodbye.